I'm going to start with a story. About 2 years ago, I was finishing up my master's in digital currency and starting to do my thesis. And I was considering, what topic should I do it in? Fintech, cryptocurrencies, exchanges, KYC, supply chain, sustainable food supply, many interesting topics. And I was working with a colleague of mine named Fadi, who also had a keen interest in blockchain. And one day, his wife was rushed to hospital in agonizing pain. She got to hospital, they didn't know what was wrong with her. Could have been appendicitis, could have been a gall bladder issue, could have been a gynecological issue. They didn't know what was wrong with her. So the first piece of information they need is they need her medical history. But of course, the hospital only had records relating to any visit that she's done at that institute. So they didn't have information such as any allergies she had, any chronic diseases she may have, any risks she may have going into an MRI scan or a CAT scan. She ended up waiting over 3 hours in agonizing pain before they eventually said, okay, let's take you through for an ultrasound scan. She had an ectopic pregnancy. She was bleeding internally. So of course, now they knew at least we need a gynecologist. Despite her giving birth in that hospital 2 years beforehand with the same gynecologist, they did not have access to that gynecologist's contact details because it wasn't one of their doctors. Of course, her and her husband did, so they called in the gynecologist. After 5 hours now, she was rushed into hospital. She had lost 3 liters of blood. Her blood pressure had dropped to 50/35, and she almost lost her life. Thankfully, the doctor saved her life and her fertility, and this year she had a child, her second son. But this is an example of a real-life problem we have. Our medical records are scattered all over the place. We have them in hospitals, clinical labs, paper based at home. We have our health insurance companies have information on us, our wearable devices, and we don't have access to complete information on our health. And I hope that none of you end up in a situation like that, an emergency, but the reality is that you, a friend, a family member, will at some point, and it's only then you start realizing, I wish I had access to that data. 45% of Americans have a chronic disease, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and they're ending up going to all these different specialists and not having access to their data, carrying around paper from specialist to specialist. How easy is that for the specialist to review? How easy is that for you to keep and look after? And then the question is, okay, where is my data? I don't remember every visit I've had at a doctor. I'm trusting my data to a hospital that's not an IT specialist company, and I'm trusting that they can protect my data. They may have printed my data and given it to another doctor in my best interest, but I don't know that. We don't know where our data is. 15 million healthcare records were hacked last year. We've seen it in government cases, such as the NHS in the UK had 8.3 million records hacked a couple of years ago. We've seen it in private companies like IBM, had over 1.5 million of its employees' health records hacked. So this is a real problem we need to think about. And we are becoming more aware of our health, and people are trying to take more control of their health. As an example, the mobile health industry is expected to raise from 30 billion in value in 2018 to 290 billion in 2025, with a focus on health management applications and with the patient as the end user. And so the big companies, of course, are starting to realize this. And we've seen them start to set up personal health records. Google and Microsoft, they both launched health record systems, but they were expecting patients to upload all their records to their centralized system. And as a result, potentially because of this, for other reasons, but either way, they've shut down. Apple has now connected directly with more than about 500 providers in the US, so that patients can, if they have their iPhone, can get access automatically from those providers. And we've got companies like United Healthcare, who have also just announced they're going to do something similar, one of the biggest insurance companies in the US, with over 1 million providers. But the question, this is great that we're getting integrated records, but the question is, do you trust these companies to have control of your data? The Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon of this world, they have pretty much all the information on us, our personal data, who are our family members, our friends, what products we buy, what we search online, where we travel. Do you also want them to have access to your medical records? We've seen stories like the Cambridge Analytica scandal of how that data can be used. And I'm not trying to scaremonger here of, oh, don't trust these big guys. It's just a case that so far we haven't been doing a, privacy by design. We've just been, okay, this is the easiest solution, let's go with that. And this is an opportunity, while we start to move towards more integrated health, to start using the latest technologies to really secure our own health. So hence, my thesis was focused on, is blockchain the answer? So I did my thesis and finished that over a year ago, and then started moving into, okay, let's actually get this into practice. So we launched in May this year our pilot project called ARIA. So we're building a blockchain-based solution and mobile applications in order to provide patients with access to their medical records. We are working with a few companies, so specifically we're working with the American Medical Center, which is an innovating company in Nicosia in Cyprus, and we're connecting directly with their clinical lab. And in March 2020, we will have released all the applications for doctors and patients, and the blockchain will be ready and being used. So let's get into a little bit of a detail on what's happening in the blockchain. So the blockchain side, we are currently developing a private blockchain, and our aim is to be having multiple nodes from the insurance sector, government, researchers, universities, and hospitals themselves. And we recognize that as a centralized company, we need to be very careful that we are not the ones that have the control of the blockchain. So while we will be the ones that set up the blockchain, that will help the consortium be developed and help the maintenance, we will only be maintaining based on the decisions of the consortium. And if the consortium decides, you know what, we don't want this company managing the blockchain, then they'd be welcome to bring someone in. Instead, our focus will be more on the front-end application and actually providing patients with user-friendly access to this data. So what we're actually doing, so we are now going directly to hospitals and we're connecting with their electronic medical record system. So we're interfacing that with the blockchain. And so what effectively happens is a patient can then come to a hospital. They will consent to use our application. They have to give consent to the hospital in order for them to transfer the information to this blockchain solution, in a similar way as they consent to send it by email, to be honest. And of course, then the hospital will also verify that this is the person who this data belongs to. Okay? And then what we do effectively is we create a patient sort of copy of the record and put that onto the blockchain. We have to leave records at the hospital because they also have a responsibility to look after their own medical records. But we wanted to make sure there's no reliance left on the hospital. So if the hospital shuts down, their servers shut down, then those records are still accessible via the blockchain. So when the patient record is transferred, that is linked to the public key, which would have been generated when they consented to be on the app. And as a result, it is only the patient who has the private key that can decrypt and get access to their records. So we end up with complete access to our medical records. Additionally, we're taking the data in its raw format, which is important for scalability, so that we're not holding heavy data. It's the lightest version of the data. But also it means we can do cool things like point out if their blood tests are out of range. We can do trend analysis, so perhaps your cholesterol's in range, but actually for the last 5 visits it's been going up. So we can start actually making the data more engaging for patients as well. So on top of them having access, they'll also be able to share these records. So it's important that, of course, they can have data portability and provide these records elsewhere. So they have simple interfaces at the front end to click and share to any doctor who's also downloaded. We have a doctor's app that looks similar but with no sharing functionality. And they'll be able to share it directly with the doctor. And effectively what happens on the blockchain side is the doctor's public key will now be linked to the record as well, so they can decrypt it. But what's important is that the patient still has control. So we'll write a transaction to the blockchain saying, okay, this public key, the doctor's public key, can now decrypt this data. But if at a later stage, the primary public key, the patient's public key says, I no longer want that doctor having access, then a new transaction gets written saying, okay, this older transaction is no longer valid, this person can't have access. So the patient ends up with full control over their records. They can have a full audit log of who has access to their records, whether they can give access to one record, all their historical records, even future records. So they have full control over their data and where it is. Okay, I'm going to move on as the time's running out. But yeah, our key benefits. Oh, the one thing I didn't mention is also the key reason we put the records onto the blockchain is immutability. Especially in healthcare, we need to know that these records are the original records. If I'm a doctor and I'm going to be relying on records which have been given to me, I need to know that there's been no risk that they've been tampered with. If I'm an insurance company and I'm getting records from this system, I need to know there's no chance there could have been fraud. If I'm a researcher and I'm doing clinical trials and I'm using some of this data on permission of the patient, I need to know it is trusted data. So there are a few sort of key difficulties we had. One is GDPR. We're working with Stelios Americanos, who are upstairs, who are GDPR partners. Now, the problem is actually not GDPR. We don't have an issue in the sense of, okay, we get the consent, we get all the consents that's necessary, and to be honest, we really address the core of GDPR. GDPR is about how do we make sure people have rights to their data. They have the right to erase their data, the right to object, the right for data portability. Well, we're actually putting it in the hands of patients. So you no longer need to go to the hospital and say, please print my record so I can then take it to someone else. They can just do that immediately themselves. They can click a few buttons and share their records. So we're giving access to data portability. The right to be forgotten. Obviously, records can't be deleted from the blockchain, but you don't have the private key, you delete your private key, then there's no longer a way to access that data. And also we can delink it from the app, so at least the information can't be accessed. So GDPR, the main actual issue we've had with GDPR is perception and trust. The healthcare providers are naturally, oh, this is a new technology, you know, we're a bit nervous about it. What if something goes wrong? My reputation is going to be on the line. Even the electronic medical record system we're integrating with, who doesn't store any data, they want us to confirm that we're compliant. And we're like, but you're not giving us any data. You have no possible liability. But there's this GDPR jitters at the moment. So we're constantly having to prove that we are protected in the data sense. Convenience versus security, we're talking private keys. This is one of the really hard things. Secure, keep your private key yourself. Keep it in your head, keep it on a piece of paper. That's the most secure way. But convenience, you're ill in hospital, you're a vulnerable patient, you're elderly, you're a child, that's really not convenient. So the most convenient solution would be, oh, we'll store it for you, don't worry. So we come on these two extremes. Now the great thing is, because we're doing a pilot, we've taken the approach of, you know what, we don't have the answer. Let's put it to the people who are using it. So we're going to work at the beginning by giving options. You can send it to your email. That's a centralized system, but that's your choice. At least you're not sending it to the same company that is working with the data. You can store it yourself, and we're even given the option that they can store it with us. I hope people don't, but we want to see. You know, it's all very nice theorizing of, it shouldn't be like this or it should be like that. Let's give the day-to-day person that doesn't really care about blockchain, they just want to know their records are safe, give them the option. I think my time is running out, so just finally I want to say, what may the future hold? Can you imagine if we can get integrated health records in a machine-readable format that are truly secure and truly owned by the patient? What different applications there could be. I mean, if it's not good enough that we can help your health, we could have automated insurance claims and underwriting. We can have precision medicine, research, real-time statistics. Can you imagine if the government could know at any moment, the rate of flu is going up because I can see from these blood test results, how they could respond in buying flu vaccines and preparing more hospital beds. And finally, artificial intelligence diagnosis. So diagnosis is, symptoms, put it together. We can actually use the data for better diagnosis, more complete diagnosis, and free up the doctors and the hospitals to be focusing on the treatment. So that's it. Thank you very much. I am on the dot of my time.
Thank you, Georgina.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.